first speaker tonight, which everybody knows, is Steve Mumley. And he's going to tell stories about working on the train. Right? Sure.
Sounds good. Lads. Yeah, are you projecting something? Are you projecting something? Well, it's supposed to be. Yeah, on the remote.
Yeah, this is going across Lake Champlain. The water's going blue.
Thanks, Chad. No problem.
All right. You know who I am, so I don't have to tell you that again. Anyway, I grew up on the Rutland Railroad. Started as a young kid riding the trains. And, boy, that light is perfect. They don't want to see me anyways. So, anyways, I grew up on the Rutland and I rode the train, mainly the milk train when I was younger, and so I had a lot of first-hand experience of being with the crews. So, milk train, engine, milk runners, coach, that's all equipment. What really makes this run is the crew, the human element. That's what I want to talk about today. So it was train 7 and 8, and the train symbols were odd north, even south. So I'm going to start in Ogdensburg. That's where the crews used to go on. And the job was listed for 6:30. That's time on duty, and departed at 6:45. Now that varied over the years, but it was usually in the 6 o'clock mark in the morning. There was a 6-man crew, of course, conductor, engineer. But they had 3 brakemen, one being the swingman, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So, Ogdensburg, they had to stay overnight, and there was a boarding house up the street on Patterson Street, and she had 4 or 5 rooms, the old gal run it. And they had a nickname for her. She was the Battle Axe. And so, they had their room, and she provided a little bit of extra, so, not the kind you're thinking of, but she had a big pot of soup every day, and all the crew had their thermos, and they would take their soup, and she made coffee and stuff, and sandwiches. And the room, I think, was 25 cents a night, and if you paid an extra 15 cents, you would get soup and coffee. So my grandfather, Mumley, my father's father, he was a conductor on the milk train for a few years, and this is in the 40s. And my father was a young brakeman. Both of their name was George, so my father became Bud Mumley, so they could separate out who they were talking about. So, my grandfather Mumley always got up early, around 5 o'clock, and he went down to the kitchen to see what the old Battle Axe had for soup that day. And he looked into the pot. Oh my gosh, his eyes came out of his head. She was boiling her underwear in the soup pot. So, he runs upstairs to the room and says, "Bud, no soup today." "What do you mean there's no soup?" "Yep. Oh, there's going to be, but you're not going to like it." "Well, what kind is it?" "It's penny soup." Oh. So she had that big pot of soup going, and I think it was probably chicken noodle or something. And of course the word went around the crew, so all members came down and, no soup for me, no soup for me. Don't just take coffee today, make a sandwich. Anyways, so the crew would go on duty in Ogdensburg. First thing the conductor would do is go in and check his watch to the standard clock. Ogdensburg was listed as a standard clock station. And that clock was adjusted at noontime every day. And so then he'd sign the register book. And he'd put in the conductor's name, the engineer's name, and time on duty. And then also watch comparison if they were off a couple seconds or so. And they had to write that in the book. Also, when the train departed, they would put the departure time. So, getting back to the crew, there was an extra man called the swingman. Now, the crew got on duty at Augsburg, ran all the way to Rutland, except for the swingman. He was a brakeman. He would get off at Alberg, and then if things were working out just right, he could catch the northbound milk coming back to Augsburg. So, let's see now. Where was I? Okay, so I'm talking about the crews. And once they get going, if you bring up that next picture. Yep, come on. There you go. There you go. So here's the crew in the combine. And the conductor's doing his work, and the brakeman, he's trying to look like he's busy. So, this picture is actually on the St. O&LC but it's identical to the way the Rutland was. And I used to love to ride in the combine back there with them. So the reason they had that swing man on there is because of the extra work. Now, in the winter, you had steam lines, and they were very difficult to connect and stuff, especially those things they drag in the snow and ice. And they had to line them up just right. So the brakeman would carry a hammer, and always had 2 or 3 fusees in his back pocket. And you weren't supposed to put the fusee to thaw them out, but they all did. Because you had to be careful, there was a rubber gasket in there, and if you ruin that, and then you've got some problems, you're gonna have a steam leak. So, and also the extra man was on because in the summertime, they had to get ice in the cars at Alberg, and I'll cover that when we get to Alberg. And so, there was a lot of work on that train. And it was an interesting, one little story I'll share with you. This actually happened out of Malone. There was a Malone Baking, which is a bakery, and they made bread and donuts and stuff, and they distributed it to all the stores along the O&LC line. So if there was a storm, snowstorm, or ice and snow, they would come down and load all their bread into the baggage compartment of the combine, and they'd get the word out, and so when they'd pull into different stations, the store owners would come down and get their share of bread and stuff for the day. So it wasn't just, it was a milk and bread train at that point. So, the milk train had a lot of work, and they picked up just about every station. And that was another reason for the swing man. There was a lot more work on the O&LC than there was on the main line. So, they would pick up at just about every station. There was 3 types of milk cars. There was the bulk car, there was the can car, and then there was the LCL car. Of course, the bulk car is self-explanatory. They would, the milk car picture? Nope, one more. We'll go back to that later. Ah, there they are. So this is the bulk car being filled. And you can see they just ran the pipe into that little door at the top. And there was 2 tanks, one on each end, and they'd fill it. Anywhere from 3,500 gallons up to as high as about 6,000 gallons with full capacity. So you can see what's going on here. This, again, this is not on the Rutland, but it's very, very similar. There's the train crew drinking some milk. Well, that was one of the benefits of the job. My father always had one of these mayonnaise jars, and he put a piece of wax paper on it, and then the lid, so it wouldn't leak, and he put a rubber band around it. Well, he always left home with that empty, because he knew one of the creameries is going to get filled up with some fresh milk, and he was a big milk drinker, and so that was one of the benefits of the job. So one of the reasons that the milk train would kind of lose their schedule was they're waiting for the car to be filled, and that was pretty common. So,
Sorry.
no problem. So, where was it? See, you interrupted me and I lost my train of thought. So we're filling up that milk car, and they have to wait. And the deal was with the milk train was, if it was an hour late, it was pretty much on time. Because they had this, and then they had the can cars. Well, that was reached, a creamery with only loaded cans, and they put them in. And the cans had the name of the creamery on it. For example, let's say Altona. I'm just picking that out of the blue. And it was painted on that can, so when that car would go to market, either New York or Boston, they would empty the cans, clean them, put them back in that milk car, and then a couple days later it would come back, and that's how they knew what creamery it was going to go to, because all the cans were marked. Now that brings me to a story about cans. There was a conductor, and a lot of you people have heard the name before, Pee Wee Stone. He was a very colorful conductor and interesting guy. And Larry Martin's in the back, and Larry's hung around the station at Moore's, and I hung around at Alberg. And Pee Wee would see Larry, and then he'd come in on the train to Alberg, and he'd say, "What's wrong with you 2 guys? Well, how come you're not out chasing women and drinking beer?" "Well, Mr. Stone, we're kind of young." "Yeah, both you guys, you got to get a life." He was an interesting guy. So anyways, up in Altona, or I believe it was Irona, one of those 2, there was a fellow who had a country store there, a general store, I should say. His name was Buddha. He was also a reverend, but he had a full department store. He sold groceries. He sold He had a feed and coal business, and he also had a clothing store. And he was almost like the mall of Altona. So, Pee Wee would come in the morning, and what they used to do, the train crew had to roll, what I failed to mention earlier, the third milk car was LCL, less than carload. And so they'd pick up half a dozen cans at different stations. Well, what the crew would have to load that, and they would take those cans and wheel them, and they would come up on their side, and they'd roll right into the car. Well, every now and then, one didn't quite make it, and it'd go on the ground. So Pee Wee would speak to that can. He had two languages other than English, profanity and obscenity. And he would yell at that can, and Reverend Butow's over there, and he said, Pee Wee, you got to clean up your act. He said, you're coming here cussing and swearing at those cans. He said, doesn't make any difference. They're going to do what they're going to do. So he said, I'll make you a deal, Pee Wee. If you can go 2 weeks without cussing, I'll give you a full set of clothes. Pee Wee says, you're on. Geez, Pee Wee get in there, and he was just good. Cam would go up and go, oh, I can't say nothing now. So at the end of 2 weeks, Reverend Butow says, Pee Wee, you've been a good fellow. He says, come on over to the store, we're going to clothe you. And he got a new pair of overalls, shirt, hat, gloves, the whole 9 yards. The next day, train comes in, they're rolling the can out, and Pee Wee lost one. Away it goes. Well, he got after that can, you blinkety, 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 blinkety. So the Reverend comes over, Pee Wee Stone, we had a deal. I got my clothes, you go to hell, you holy roller. So those are the kind of people that milk train was interesting. So anyways, skipping right along, when the train got into Alberg, that was a busy time. So when they pulled up on the main line, and they cut the engine off, and that would run up to the coal chute and freshen up the coal pile and get a drink of water. Meanwhile, the shifter in Alberg would go over and get the milk car from Alberg. And that was shipped 365 days a year. As a matter of fact, they shipped milk right up to the last day of the strike. So the shifter would go over and get that car. And it was kind of laid out a little funny there in Alberg, because the CV had a main line, and that was closest to the station. And the backtrack where the creamery was actually, it was off the CV's main line. So the shifter from Alberg had to go up into the yard, come across, then go up, get that milk car and come back. So it took probably 15 minutes. And then they put it on the head end. Meanwhile, the conductor would go into the station, and he would sign the register book. That was their authority that they've arrived, and who's with the crew, and how many cars they had. And that sat on a little desk outside the window at the station. And so that was, Jim Murphy, that was the point of arrival and departures. Yeah, so that was the proof. There was no computers in those days, as we know.
I was there the day they went on strike, the day I lost my job.
Yeah, Jim, in fact, I found a message and I sent it to Jim. His job was abolished. So, nice note to get. So anyways, after the conductor was doing that, Willard Morris was the agent there for close to 50 years, if not more, longer. And then he would go out and get the express off that and do all the business. So it was pretty busy there for a few minutes. Now, the southbound, being late as they usually were, an hour, sometimes longer, then they would actually meet the northbound there. So they would come in on the siding right off the main. So it was kind of busy there. There was 2 trains there, and everybody was doing business. A lot of crews walking around, the shifter moving on the milk car. So a lot of activity for a small town. Hard to believe it's all gone now. So the milk train also served the Mumley family as a taxi, because my grandparents lived in Malone, and I, of course, lived in Alberg. And I loved railroads since the time I was born. So I was always looking for an excuse to go visit Grandma and Grandpa. Now my grandparents thought I just really liked them. But I was really just riding the train. And so one time I was on, and my mom called, and my grandmother said, he's coming on the milk train. So she said, okay, good, I'll look out for him. And the conductor was Al Bean. Larry Marnes knows him well. He was a character. He was a kidder. He was a joker. So I get on and get in the seat, and Al comes, you got a ticket? No, Mr. Mr. Bean, I have no ticket. Well, you're gonna have to work then. Of course, I was probably 8 years old. Well, I'm all ready. So anyways, we went across Ross's Point Bridge and got into Ross's Point, did the work and headed out. And the next stop was Champlain. So they had to pick up, they had set off an empty. So you see, going north, excuse me, that would be train 7. They took all the empties that were coming back from the Boston and New York milk markets. And as I mentioned earlier, you had to be careful with the can cars because they were designated for the certain creameries, because all the cans were marked that way. And the same with the bulk cars, they would continually go back to the same creamery. So they'd go along and set them all up. Well anyways, so at Champlain, the air goes, toosh, and Mr. Bean comes, oh, we're going to have a little delay here, young man. We just had a flat tire. And of course the brakemen are going by, and he said, there goes the boys now to change it. All right. I thought they were steel, but you know, what the heck do I know? So, up the track, I think it was Ellenberg next. Oh, another flat. There goes the boys to change it. So this went on all the way to Malone Junction. And they pulled in Malone Junction and got across the diamond. And there they go. Of course, here comes Al. Yeah, what's this, Mr. Bean? Another flat? Oh, yeah. He said, hope we get in soon because we're running out of spares. Well, I looked out the window and I saw my grandmother sitting there on the platform with the car. And I said, Mr. Bean, what's that? The hell with your flat tires. I'm getting off this wreck. My grandma's out there. So, anyways, it was pretty colorful. I enjoyed that train a lot, and of course I rode the freight trains a lot later on. But that pretty much sums it up. I think, we forgot the Albert picture.
Right there.
There. This is diesel time, okay? That's in 1951 it became a mixed train. They did actually freight work and stuff, and talk about a train being late, and it was really late. But you see the 403 on that siding? That's the switcher. And I don't know, I don't think that they haven't got the Albert car in there yet, or unless they put it on the rear. But that was part of the scene that would happen there. And then I was mentioning earlier, the main line's right there for the CV. And this is the Rutland main, and that was that siding. So if this northbound was a little bit early, well, they wouldn't be early, but they were on time, and these guys they would meet right there. So it was really busy.
They showed the car where the milk car came from behind the station.
Yeah.
Basically.
That's at Worthmore Feed Store.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that came every Wednesday from St. Albans, clockwork. And then the creamery was over here. The highway was here and the creamery was there. And like I said, that was 365 days a year. That was a bowl car. And it went on GPX cars and went to Somerville, Mass. So that pretty much kind of wraps it up. I know we're running a little late on time, so I'll keep the story to a minimum. But anybody have any questions about it or comments?
The pipe going into the roof of the car,
Yeah,
previous picture,
right.
is that the milk going in?
That's the milk going in.
Well, it must have took a long time. Small diameter pipe.
Yeah, I know. Well, I don't know. It, you know, they would, the farmers had to get their milk into the creameries early, and they knew the milk train was coming along, leaving Augsburg at 6:30, and or 6:45. And, yeah.
A lot of cars were spotted at creameries and already filled, and the train just came and picked up a full car.
Yeah.
They didn't all load into, those were partial loads going in, wasn't that?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good comment. Basically, they had bulk cars that were considered LCL. So one creamery would fill one tank, and then they'd go up to another creamery, because they could only do a half a car, and they'd finish it off. In that particular case, they'd have to wait for it.
But they one coming out and going into the tank, where did they come from? A holding tank?
In the creamery? Yeah, yeah. They
Had the
had,
creamery there parked out there?
they had storage tanks in the creamery, because they pasteurized the milk and stuff, and then they washed the cans for the farmer, and they
TV
the
didn't
cans.
have any bulk, we only had milk cans.
Right, yeah. The Rutland had a fair amount of bulk cars, and they had a fair amount of can cars. So what I failed to mention, and I should have, was the icing of the cars, and that happened in Alberg, okay? It was at the Lakeside Ice House, and so when that northbound would come in, they'd get all their train orders. Well, they didn't get train orders because they were first-class train. And that's something I wanted to mention. You have three types of authority. You have your rule book, you have your timetable, and you have train orders. That's how the trains operated, okay? Milk train was a first-class train, so they never got train orders unless they were running over 2 hours late or they had an unscheduled meet. So anyway, that northbound, they get their orders and stuff, and the first thing they do is go down to the lake shore, back their train into the Lakeside Ice House. And I wish I had a picture of it. It was quite an
There's
operation.
some in my album back there.
Yeah, Jim's got some of his albums he could show you if you want to see what it was like.
There'll be some tonight too.
There'll be some tonight. So, that was a busy operation. They had like 3 men that worked at the ice house, but you've got a 6-man crew, and that's another reason for the swing guy. So they'd have to drag all those blocks of ice into the canned cars. And each car had an axe in it, so they would chop up the ice blocks, throw it up on top of the empty cans to pre-cool them. And this is in the summer, of course. In winter, they didn't have to do that. And they would go and set those empties up, all the creameries. By the time they got to Augsburg, that's all they had left was the combine. And so the next day, as the creamers along the line, they would take out those cans, fill them, put them back in, put the ice back on. A lot of times they used the canvas over the top if it was really hot July days, and that would help keep the ice cans cool. So Bill had a question.
Steve, the cans, were those the same cans that had come from the farm, or were they moved in the creamery from the farm cans to the...
That's a good question. And Bill was asking if the cans were the same one that came from the farmer. And
Yes.
they were, okay.
So not only did it have a station name on it, it had a farm name on it.
Yeah, and there's a picture in our bulletin, on our program. The little picture that shows that, like, the can says Middlebury, and then it has a number above it. The number is the farmer, and the Middlebury is the station. Yeah.
Did they ever have any paying pastures in the combine?
Oh, yes, they had, that conductor had a lot of work because, there was a survey that came out in 1953 when the Rutland was trying to get rid of passenger service. And so, I was just reading this the other day. So when they made their case to the state of New York, they said that they averaged 5 passengers a day. So there was usually 3 going south and 2 going north for an average. A lot of days, nobody. Yeah, and they'd like to get some passengers, you could have somebody to talk to. But they weren't really anybody out of Augsburg, not unless they're desperate. You've heard it, people say, this is slow like a milk train. Well, that was the reason.
The interesting also about Pearl's department store.
Yeah.
In the station, the fire station was over here. And if the alarm was sounded, they would come out of there and go over and open up the fire station, sign it up, and volunteers came in, they could get in the truck and go.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, well, you can see Pearl's department. This is the Alberg Mall, by the way. Yeah, department store, which is here, and then up here was the library. People thought I liked to read, but I was always just up there, could get a good view of the yard and stuff, watch all the trains. And then here was the town clerk, and then you had the agent and then the express business. So it was a busy place. And yeah, at one time the fire department was right there. Yeah, and then they built one across the track, but there was a button inside the station to sound the alarm if they couldn't get the regular, because the telephone operator in town would get the alarm and would send it, but there was also a button in the station, and you could push it. And I remember Willard Morris said, whatever you do, don't touch that. And the other thing he said, don't touch that chain, that was to the order board. And so Willard went across to get a coffee or something, and my buddy Richard and I were there, and we let that chain go. Holy crap. So Willard was a man of steel. He comes back over and you could see it, the order board, it was clear, and it was always set for stop because it was a train order station. So he comes in, yeah, so you guys had a little fun today? Oh, the chain broke, Mr. Morris. I can see that, he says. So, I got some more questions? Yeah, Bill.
Do you know if the station was built specifically to have all those other uses, or was built when at a time there was so much railroad use, and then as they had extra space over time, they just rented it out?
Good question. If you didn't hear it, if you wanted to know if the station was designed like this for the department store and the library and the town clerk said, no, it wasn't. It was originally for the customs. Customs used to be upstairs. And they had a little building right over on the other side that was a detention building. So if you got taken off the train because you're illegal, they'd put you in there and lock you up. And that was always a joke around town. You better be good.
Shows a car parked here by the cross, the customs got the back and all the bottles on the floor, they're on the ground, the customs got to pull it out.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, it was a busy place. So,
And that was one story, and then they had a fire.
yeah, it was built as a one-story building, and it's built by the Central Vermont, because the CBE were the first people into Albert when they were building the track.
The Swanton station.
Yes. Identical to Swanton Station, that's now a museum. And then as, I don't know if there was a fire or not, but anyways, they added the second floor for the, there was a fire.
Where the blueprint says that in the information I got in the document said there was a fire.
Okay, so they added that second floor for customs. Pearl's department store was not there. It was a women's waiting room, because they had women's and the men's. And they had the bathroom separated also. Well, then Pearl had a store downtown that caught fire by a young kid playing with fire. No, it wasn't me. And burned down, and so they didn't rebuild that store, so they moved into the ladies' waiting room in the station.
Where's downtown, Steve?
What's this?
Where's downtown?
Well, Albert's a pretty big place, so it was, well, yeah, it's hard to place it today. It's where the town hall is now, the Alberg village offices.
They had a big vault there, a big door.
Yes.
Where that
You know, scrapyard. Yeah, that was kind of interesting. So there was a vault, it was about right in here, and it was all made of cement, and it had a huge door on it. And that was for, it was to deal with the customs and moving payroll and stuff like that. But in later years, they used it for their forms. And they had a big key on a ring, and you'd go there, and so we opened up, the Willard would say, go get me a pad of Form 19, that's train orders. And opened up that door, and that was it. There were just forms on the shelf in there.
and the bulletin board shelf and stuff in there. I
Yep.
know what the bulletin board is.
Yeah, I got a feeling. Yeah, close to home.
Oh, very close,
Yeah. So I was in the service when they tore the building down, but my younger brother Michael was around. He got a couple of pictures, and so there was the rumor that there was something really valuable in there. It could have been gold. There could have been a lot of money. So that was the thing going around town. And so finally they blasted and opened the door because the key was long gone. And when they blasted it out, there was Form 19s and stuff just flying all over the place.
Also, he's good at removing snow.
Oh, that's right. So to back up a little bit, Jim Murphy was a young operator, covered the weekends at Albert,
38 was.
1958. And if you read my article that I wrote about Albert, there's in that picture, there's a 58 Ford parked there, and that was Jim's car. So I always hung around, I did all the work I could, and I would shovel the snow off the platform. Until one day Willard called me in and he said, I got some bad news. He said, the section boys had filed a grievance with the union, and somebody's cleaning and doing their work. So you can't shovel snow anymore. But I had a lot of other jobs there.
He shoveled it for me, because I came out, we almost had 2 feet of snow that day, and I could hardly get out of the station. I came
Yep.
out, this kid shows up, I didn't know who he was. He says, I'll help you. I said, no. He said, no, I'll get it. But he knew where the scoop was.
Yeah.
He was afraid of it.
I was
I didn't know
experienced.
it for 20 years. probably.
Yeah. I have a train order with Jim signed on, one of the Rutland train orders. And that was interesting. The authority from Albert to Ross's Point was under the CV Railroad, under the Rutland. So the CV trains would get in, they'd have to get a Rutland train order to run from Albert to Ross's Point. And then the same coming back, they'd get another order at the Ross's Point station. And the Rutland had control on the bridge and everything.
Ted Paul worked in Ross's Point.
Yeah, and Ted Paul, he lived in Alberg, and I shouldn't be telling all these stories because people want to get to the next program, but.
No, keep going.
So, well, you know, back in those days, it cost 15 cents or maybe a nickel to call on the landline to Ross's Point. So his wife would come into the office in Alberg, and she said, I want to call Ted. Her name was Naomi. You remember her, Jim? So Anyway, so you'd have to ring it up on the block phone, and Ted would answer, and of course you had that headset one on, so they'd take the town phone, she would go home and said, I'm gonna call her back, and she called in on the city phone, or town phone, and they put those two together. Well, if the operator had to stand there holding the railroad phone, and I remember Bob Rickson said, come on, Ted, cut it short, my arms are getting tired. So, yeah, a lot of that went on. There was, plus, Ted Paul had a little egg business. They had some chickens running around their place, and so they sold the eggs at the station. You know, and there's a little cigar box that you put the 59 cents in or whatever it cost for the eggs, and they, you know, it was just something they did for them. Something would be totally unheard of today.
And now the golfer, they had the only bloodstains.
Yeah, yeah, yep, that's right. So
Steve, since it was a CD station, why did Rutland have control of that section?
now there's a good question. Laz just asked me. It was a CV station, and the CV was the first one into Albert, the first one to go across the bridge. But the Rutland had train order authority across. And, you know, I don't have a definite answer, but I'm going to take a guess. I think the CV didn't want to bother with it and let the Rutland take care of it, and they had an agreement. And I remember there was a bulletin put out the day of the strike giving temporary control of the train authority to Ross's Point to the CV. They could use their own train orders. And luckily, I grabbed all those messages out of the station when it was closing up. But the station stayed open for almost a year after the strike because the CV was still running to Ross's Point. Okay, and they didn't, you know, they had the picket line, but they didn't cross the picket line on the CV because it was gauntlet track going across Ross's Point. Each had their own tracks, so they weren't running on Rutland iron. And Mike.
Curious, do you remember what kind of traffic the CV did run through there? They had,
yeah, they had, it was mainly interchange with the D&H, and they were getting limestone coming out of, I think it was Shazy or someplace, and that was going to the paper mills in Maine, and you could come in those gondola cars. They would, you know, it was feed, it was paper, stuff like
Yeah,
that.
the lumber stuff coming from Maine.
Lumber out of Maine, yeah,
so it was more of an interchange connection as opposed to
yeah.
the passenger trains and whatnot ran on a separate line.
Yeah, the freight business was an interchange with the D&H.
A lot of coal came through there going
Yep.
into the city.
Jim just pointed out interest, a lot of coal. And I remember there would be a coal car just ahead of the buggy, and of course they burned coal in their caboose stoves. And so they'd get up in it and they'd say, hey, we got a nice one today. And they'd get up and they'd skim the top off, put it in their buggy. It was better coal than they could get out of the supply room in St. Albans. And that was very common. They keep their eye out for it.
You can still see the cut from the line place where they harvest the lime in Shazy, by the Shazy orchards. It still runs in there, no track, it's all gone.
Yeah.
You can still study where it goes.
And there was one business that I just been researching lately. I do a lot of research on traffic. They were loading talc in bags into boxcars in Johnson, Vermont on the St. O&LC, and they would bring that to Swanton, and the CV would pick that up and take that to Ross's Point D&H, and it went to Ausable Forks to J&J Rogers Paper Mill, and they used 2 to 3 cars of talc a month, and would go on those wooden St. Jane LC cars. So that was, yeah, it was quite a variety of traffic, pretty much across the board. Any other questions?
Yeah, are the windows busted out of there on the bottom floor?
That's a good question. It looks like it. I didn't do it. But I have that sign at home. And I have that one there too. It's in my office.
I know where they are.
Yeah. So in this particular picture, that sign is a dark green with yellow writing and lettering, I should say. And it's a square sign. There's no other like that on the Rutland, okay? Reason being, it was a CV building, and the CV had, in their agreement, they had a joint station agreement that they maintained the building to paint it and do the signs. So that's why the signs are white with black lettering, because that was a CV sign. And this sign was painted in St. Albans shop, It was the dark CV green with, as I said, yellow lettering. And then in around 1956, when the Rutland was going with the new greens and yellow stuff, it went back to St. Albans, and they painted it yellow, and it's got green letters, and that's the one that's in my office now, courtesy of a good friend of mine, Armand. So, and the thing is square, so if you look at a CV station, they always have their maple leaf on that, and that's the same type of,
And it's 48 by 48, is it?
48 by 48.
Part of the way in, about 6 inches, you got a seam where it's welded together.
Yeah,
That's what they made, even on one, and they weren't big enough, so they had to make a special part on the edge of it to slide
yeah.
it out.
Just think of all the work that went into that, huh?
They
So,
don't do that.
yeah, so it kept everybody busy in the shop. So, any other questions? I think I'm out of stories, so I'll turn it over to Laz.
So our next speaker is Andy Clermont. He's going to talk about modeling on the O&LC.
Okay, I'm going to talk about modeling the milk train on the Ogdensburg and Lake Champlain. And I'm glad to be in Rouse's Point because this was the last station my family lived at when they worked for the Rutland. Okay, last. Yeah, maybe I'll have to. See if you can get us back to the beginning.
Going the wrong way?
Going the wrong one. Okay, now go ahead to the next one. Okay, so it's between 6 and 7 o'clock in the morning and the milk train's at Ogdensburg, and they're getting ready to leave on next. And when I modeled my model railroad, my intentions were to model Albert to Malone and go once around the basement. And then I decided that I had to get to Norwood so that I could have the traffic go across and leave the railroad. And at the ends of my railroad, I do a reverse loop staging yard, so when I run a train off the railroad, it can be ready to come back on. And that's the loops you see in the center here. And then I realized that I could fit Ogdensburg in around the outside edge of it against the wall. So, although I never intended to, I did model Ogdensburg somewhat. And you can go ahead to the next one. It's good to be modeling Ogdensburg because it's the origin of the milk train and the mail train, and there was some good traffic in town. Western Condensing, Diamond Match Company, so I can model the traffic along with the origin of the milk train. And they're ready to depart here. Go ahead to the next. This is a Overland Models 10-wheeler, and the crew's talking over orders in the morning before they leave. Next. I scratch built this milk car using Athearn 6-foot trucks and detail associated door hardware and ladders. And this one also, this was one of the 2 cars that were converted from baggage cars to can cars. And the first car that I showed you here was the bulk tank car where they pick up half loads along the way. And this was the can car on my model railroad. I can't do a thing on model railroading without talking about Rapido trains coming out with Ramapo switch stands, which are right for the Rutland, and Robin Harding doing actual folding targets that fit together the way the real targets do for the switch stands. They're all over my model railroad now.
Hold that picture, it's going to Rob.
And those Rapido trains and Robin has made it affordable to have one of these on every turnout on my model railroad. And with, I don't know, 100+ turnouts, they can't cost $10 a piece, it'd kill you. So anyway. I'm short on Rutland baggage cars, so we got a New York Central baggage car on the train today. And that's a Metro Models, I believe. And this is a Railworks coach on, this is unusual for a brass car because it has really free rolling wheels. Most of them like have square wheels and you drag them along and they skid. And they're heavy, so you want really free rolling wheels. So anyway, Railworks did a nice job where most companies do not. Okay, we've gone ahead to Norwood, New York now, and they're at the milk platform, and they're going to load cans into the Rutland car. In the center of the photograph here, there's a sedan, and Bill Badger built that. Was that a Sylvan model?
Yep.
Yeah, and 37 Ford?
Chevy.
He knows cars, but a very nice model. So, next photograph. This is the New York Central side of the Norwood station. The New York Central and the Rutland shared this, and the Rutland passed behind the far side and the New York Central up here in the front. And Norwood is the only location that I'm aware of where the Rutland picked up an interchange car from another railroad loaded with milk. And this is from the Norwood and St. Lawrence Railroad. And they'd set a car out and the Rutland would pick it up. And the car there is a sunshine kit, resin kit. And here's the engine backing in on the car to pick it up, and the train's left on at the station so all of those 2 passengers can get on and off. Okay, they put the train. They put the train. I'm gonna talk louder.
Yep.
They put the train back together and they're passing the Norwood Yard office. I don't know how many of you know Glenn Glastetter, but he came up with a very fine screen that I use in screen doors. And it is so fine, it really looks the part, and it comes from tea bags. So anyway, there's a screen door on that. It's hard to see in the photograph. They've moved ahead to the water plug, taking water, and the cars in the background are in Norwood Yard, and they're cars that are going to go to the Norwood and St. Lawrence, to the St. Lawrence Paper Company. You got a load of car and a couple empty Rutland box cars. The Rutland would feed the Norwood and St. Lawrence empty cars. And then beyond that is a CP mini box, common for those to be loaded with pulpwood going to the paper mill. And they've moved ahead to the mock-up of what will be the coal tower, the coal bunker in Norwood. And I don't know how often they had to take coal. If they could do the 120 miles from Ogdensburg and back without taking coal. Steve?
Well, they also had a shifter there too.
But how often did they have to coal the engines? How many miles did they?
Well, generally, they coaled them at Alberg and Rutland.
Okay.
But in this one in Norwood, they would top them off, but they also had a switcher there that needed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Well, anyway, so we're still in Norwood here next. Now we moved ahead to North Lawrence to the Deer River Bridge. And they're coming in on the side track. They're going to do some work at the plant there. This plant has been hard to find good information on the model.
Oh, we won't throw it away.
There's,
I think they get the light working.
the people in the kitchen.
yeah. Oh. This is a mock-up of the plant because I haven't been able to find any good photographs of the track side of the building to model it. And I've been to the building a couple times, and they've never been open where I could go in and see if they had any photographs or talk to anybody who might know an old employee. So I'm stumped, for the most part, as far as what this building looked like. There's some postcards from the 20s and 30s maybe, and there's some Ritchie shots taken out where you just see the cars being pushed in, but you can't see the buildings. So anyway, it did have a stack and a water tank, but I'm stuck with it as a mock-up right now until I get more information. This is one of the two cars they're picking up there. This is an Overland model, and this is the bulk milk tanks on a flat car. This plant apparently Borden's shipped out of one side of it, and Seal Test shipped the other side and it was a subsidiary, maybe National Ice Cream or General Ice Cream that they were shipping. Next. The Overland models don't have doors on the tanks, and I added the hatch doors on the side because they're in the photographs of the cars on the Rutland. So this is a Sunshine model resin kit of the Rutland's milk car, and they had canned cars that were picked up here. They were on the Borden side. The next place that the railroad will go is through the Malone area, which I haven't modeled yet. And I did model the Malone station, so they will pass through this after going through Malone Yard and then down through Morton Siding. And this is my model of Morton Siding. And they picked up a milk car there from the Sheffield Farms plant. And then also what will happen at Malone Junction is the milk train will meet the mail train, but I don't have Morton Siding modeled yet because that's going to be I don't have the Malone Junction siding modeled yet. That's going to be part of the Malone area. So they're meeting at Chateaugay. And they're crossing Depot Street here in Chateaugay, and the milk truck in the center of the photograph was a model that Mike Sparks built for me and showed up with one day, which was really neat to get because a lot of these plants by the later years were having some of their milk trucked in tank trucks. And that's the Oliver and Spellman building in the background. That was a storehouse. They were a feed dealer. And this is one of the places on the O&LC that in 1937 Department of Transportation in New York started installing grade crossing flashers. So in the middle of upstate New York in a tiny town, you had grade crossing flashers on the Rutland. This is the milk plant in Chateaugay, which should be as big as this whole screen. If I had the room, there's a beautiful aerial shot of it. But anyway, they, from what I understand, possibly received milk by rail, shipped some milk by rail, but their big business was shipping condensed milk out. And I don't know if it was in cans or if it was a dried milk. I've never seen any waybills or traffic from this plant. But they actually had their own seal for this plant because they were considered a large shipper. And you would think that something would show up, but I haven't seen anything. The engines come off the train here and they're getting ready to move cars to dig out that milk car that's in the center on the passing track. These milk plants, when we're talking about modeling, they all receive coal. And it was usually soft coal. So it would be coming out of the Virginia area, B&O Railroad maybe. And here they're pulling the milk car out, and they'll have to put the box car back in after they get this built into the train. This is just a spot on my model railroad, and it's Clinton Pond, and this was at the summit on the O&LC. And the unusual thing about the summit on the O&LC around Cherubusco is it's the highest point on the Rutland, and it was all swampland. And all the rivers that you see on the O&LC, the Deer River, the Salmon River in Malone, and Clinton Pond emptied into the English River, all flowed into the St. Lawrence River in to the north, because we're on the north end of the Adirondacks.
It's one of those strange phenomena that high points of land, and I think that you're right, it's because rivers start there.
Yeah.
But Mount Holly, East Dorset, the places that are the high points of land for that particular river system or whatever, are all swamp.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't expect it, but it is.
Yeah. So anyway, I couldn't fit in Cherubusco, but I did fit that bulk milk tank car into the train that's picking up. And Cherubusco was one of the spots I think that they partial loaded, and Burke was another one. So that would be picking up along the way at locations that I don't model. We've arrived at Ellenburg, New York, and there was a few little feed dealers here, the GLF. There was a farm equipment dealer here, but what was in town that was big business for the Rutland was the milk plant. And that was across the river, which the engines crossed after leaving the train at the station. And he's going to pick up milk cars from the plant here. And this is the boiler end, and they had a coal dump there. Now he's gone around to the other end where the ice house was, and he's pulling milk cars. And these are a couple more scratch-built cars that I did. Go ahead. The next stop is going to be Moore's, and the Moore's milk plant actually closed, I think, around 1937. What they started doing was trucking the milk over to Champlain, where there was a bigger Yankee Milk was over there. I think it was Yankee Milk at that point in time. So this actually closed, but I modeled Moore's, and I wanted to have another stop for the milk train, so I modeled what was the Dairyman's Leap Creamery there. And this guy would be getting ready to shovel coal through the chute in the side of the building there. And labor intensive. At Moore's, they had a long passing track on my model railroad anyway. And train number 9 meets the milk train there. And we got train number 9 double-headed coming through town while the milk train pulls into the station. Another shot of the Dairyman's Leap Creamery from the street side. And the train's letting traffic pass after the freight left, and then it'll move forward and work the car at the Dairyman's Leap Creamery. He's pulling the car there. This actually probably would have shipped cans, and it should be a can car. And I'm actually looking for some more of those Sunshine Rutland kits, if anybody's looking to get rid of one. Now we're down to Bridge 85 over the Great Chazy River. And this was a neat bridge in that it was moved here from the Salmon River in Malone in 1901 when they wrote an engineering report when the Rutland took over the railroad. The bridge in Malone was found to have the center pier corrupted and had to be taken out and replaced. And it was a perfect length fit for this location, which was still a wood bridge and one of the last wood bridges on the O&LC. And the wood bridges were much deeper to hold the weight, so you can see where the color of the stone changes on the piers. That's not from the river, that's from age. And the stonework going up would be the new stonework for the shallower steel bridge. And per Jeff English, this was probably around the last point in time that they would have done this in stone, and it would have been concrete if they'd done it later. And now this is a 2-mile stretch where the Rutland went over 4 bridges, and this is Dubois Road under the first car to the left in the picture, and then Beaver Creek. And now we're down to Perry Mills, and here the bridge was raised and they did use concrete. And I've been to all these locations and walked through and taken photographs and to figure out what was going on with these. We passed through Champlain, which is under construction, and they probably would have met AM1, the local there. That's what usually happens on the model railroad. And they're going through Dewey Cut, and that's Dewey Cut Bridge in the background. Jeff English came up with plans for the bridge, so I was able to build it without photographs. And then photographs showed up later on, and it's a good match for the model, so that worked out well. We made it down to Rouse's Point, and they're crossing the Diamond over the Delaware and Hudson Railroad. And they've left the train on the other side of the Diamond, and they've come across to pick up a can car. And this was a B&M car. There were a few of those being used on the Rutlands, Ogdensburg, and Lake Champlain because the Rutland cars were getting old, and it was cheap to lease better cars, apparently. So what they did was they leased cars that were no longer being used on the B&M. And this is a picture of the model. Actually it's an Athearn milk car that I sanded the sides and ends off and resheathed it to do it as a B&M milk car. I think a brass model came out of these not too long ago, which is very nice, but this fits the bill for me. And we moved ahead to the Rouse's Point station. The station's been torn down and the immigration building's being used as the station here. And you have the CV local in the background coming over from Swanton. And the Rutland's train's pulling up to the station. Here we're going out onto the lake. And my family's last house was on Montgomery Street, which was the street that goes along the lake when you get this far north in Rouse's Point. It was the first house to the north of the track. So I've got a model house there, and I haven't modeled the actual house, but that's where they lived. And my father used to go out and take pictures of trains coming on and off the lake there. And so someday I intend to model the actual house. The next slide was going to be of the swing bridge in the middle of the lake with the tower that was occupied. But I didn't include it because I thought it was getting long. But
The trucks with hay, are those typical for that? I'm kind of curious about that.
In the early 50s, apparently there was a drought in the southeast New York State, or southeast United States, and the Rutland jumped on that by importing hay from Canada and shipping it out of Rouse's Point. And they were loading up to, there were days where they loaded up to 30 boxcars a day of hay and shipped it out of Rouse's Point in 1953. So anyway, they'd come down in caravans and just load up and be shipped out of Rouse's Point. This is over in Alberg, and this is the Milton Co-op Creamery. Steve talked about that the car that was spotted at this building would be pulled by the yard switcher. And here's the Alberg yard switcher, and we're in a little earlier year than the diesel shot he had, but they're going in to get the waiting milk car. And this would be a waiting milk car. You see one in the Nimke book, or in the Shaughnessy book, down around Shelburne, Queen City Park. Queen City Park, you see a good shot of this car. It was a wood car that was used before the steel ones later on. And anyway, they're pulling that car out to get ready to put it on the milk train. And we got the crossing shanty that was in Albert there, and the crossing guard who got replaced by modern grade crossing flashers and gates later on. And this is the waiting milk car. It's actually a Tichy refrigerator car that's been reworked with express trucks and brake hardware and some other modifications to model the waiting car. And The local switcher is waiting for the mail train to arrive so he can do his work and put that on the train. And we're looking south in Albert Yard. And the mail trains, or the milk train's arriving here now, and they're gonna pull up to the station and get their train worked over by the switcher. And they've finished their work, and the two milk trains are passing in Alberg Yard here, and the northbound's coming in with a Pacific on the front end. And that's it. It goes off the end of the railroad into the south staging yard. I've got a couple cars here that weren't on these trains, but I'm gonna include in the milk service, and it's one of the Borden's butter dish cars. And then the Rutland still had two of these milk cars left up until I think it was 54 or 55 on. So that's possible can car maybe for that Moore's station, or the Moore's milk plant. And that's it. Any questions?
Thank you. So we're a little early. We made up time. It was amazing. So I want to talk about this afternoon's site tours. Can you hear me? Actually, you should come up because you're going to be the police.
Whoa, tired.
No. So anyways,